My name is Jessica Harper, and I was 28 years old when my own mother sent me the coldest email I had ever read in my life. The subject line was just 3 words: "Don't chase us." I opened it at my desk during lunch, thinking maybe she was complaining again about me missing a family dinner or refusing to cover another one of my sister's emergencies. Instead, the first sentence made my body go still. "Jessica, your sister and I took your $550,000 savings and moved to Paris. Enjoy being broke." I stared at the screen so long my vision blurred, not because I was crying, but because my brain refused to believe a mother could type those words and press send. Then I read the next line. "You were always too selfish to share, so we helped ourselves." My hands didn't shake. That was the strange part. Everything inside me went quiet, like a storm had suddenly pulled all the air out of the room. That money wasn't just cash sitting in an account. It was years of sacrifice. Late nights, missed vacations, rejected dates, cheap meals, and every promise I had made to myself after my grandmother died. It was the future I had built because no one else had ever protected me. I checked the account once, then twice, then a third time. Empty. Not low. Not frozen. Empty. And while my mother and sister were probably unpacking silk scarves in some Paris apartment, I sat there looking at the proof that they had finally done what I had always feared. They had stopped pretending I was family and treated me like a resource. Before I tell you why they panicked later and begged me to answer one question: whose accounts were those? Tell me what time it is where you are right now and where you're watching from. I want to know how far this story travels, because somewhere out there, someone needs to hear what happens when the responsible daughter finally stops saving everyone else. Before that email, I lived in Portland, Maine, where I worked as a digital evidence archivist for a private law firm that handled high-value civil fraud cases. It sounds boring until you understand what I actually did. I preserved deleted files, tracked document histories, organized financial records, and built timelines from the tiny details most people overlooked. My job trained me to notice patterns: a renamed folder, a forwarded email, a login from the wrong city, a signature that appeared too clean. I was good at seeing what people tried to hide, which made the betrayal almost insulting. My mother, Patricia Harper, should have known better than to steal from someone who spent her life proving what other people denied. My sister, Madison Harper, was 24 and had never held a job longer than 3 months. But in my mother's eyes, Madison was not irresponsible. She was sensitive. She was creative. She was still finding herself. I was the opposite. I was strong. I was independent. I was fine. Those words sound like compliments until you realize they are excuses people use when they want to take from you without feeling guilty. When my grandmother Eleanor died, she left me a private inheritance because, in her words, I was the only one who understood the value of building instead of begging. It wasn't public, and it wasn't supposed to be touched until I decided whether to buy a home, start a small records management business, or simply give myself one secure thing no one could threaten. My mother hated that. She never said it directly, but I saw it in the way her mouth tightened whenever the inheritance came up. "Your grandmother always played favorites," she once said, folding napkins so sharply I thought she might tear them. Madison was worse. She made jokes about me becoming rich and boring, then asked if I could loan her money for rent, flights, courses, retreats, skincare equipment, and once, unbelievably, a French language immersion program she quit after 6 days. I said no more often than I used to, but guilt still worked on me. That was how they survived. Not by asking honestly, but by making me feel cruel for having boundaries. The months before they disappeared, the questions became more specific. My mother asked which bank held the inheritance. Madison asked whether trust accounts could be accessed internationally. My mother wanted to know whether my work computer stored personal documents. Madison joked that I was so paranoid for using two-factor authentication. At the time, I told myself I was overthinking. Isn't that what responsible daughters do? We explain away the warning signs because admitting the truth would mean accepting that the people who raised us are studying us like a target. The last family dinner before Paris was at my mother's townhouse. Madison had a glossy travel magazine open to a spread about luxury apartments near the Seine, and my mother said, "Some people wait their whole lives to enjoy beauty. Others hoard money and call it maturity." I remember putting down my fork and asking, "Was that directed at me?" Madison laughed and said, "Not everything is about you, Jess." But my mother didn't laugh. She just looked at me with the calm face she wore whenever she had already decided I was wrong. 3 weeks later, they were gone. The townhouse was cleared out, Madison's car was missing, and my mother's neighbor told me movers had come before sunrise. Then the email arrived. Looking back, the theft didn't begin the day the money vanished. It began years earlier, every time they trained me to ignore my own discomfort. Have you ever been the person everyone calls strong, only because they know you'll bleed quietly? The first thing I did after reading that email was not call my mother. I knew better. A thief wants your panic because panic makes you sloppy. Instead, I closed my office door, opened my personal laptop, and began documenting everything exactly the way I would for a client. Timestamp, screenshot, account access history, email headers, transaction records, device alerts, and every message my mother and Madison had sent in the last 6 months. I checked the account activity and found 3 outgoing transfers, each broken into amounts that looked deliberate. $190,000, $180,000, and $180,000. Not a single messy withdrawal. Not a desperate grab. A plan. My stomach turned when I saw the destination names: 2 domestic intermediary accounts and 1 international wire connected to a Paris-based rental management company. They hadn't just taken my money and run. They had used my future as a deposit on a fantasy life. Then I saw something that made the hair rise on my arms. One of the transfer approvals had been processed using a backup email address I hadn't used in years, an old address my mother once helped me create when I was in college. That meant she hadn't guessed her way in. She had used history. She had used motherhood as a password. I called Daniel Brooks, a partner at the law firm where I worked. Daniel wasn't my boss, but he handled asset recovery cases and had a reputation for staying calm even when people were falling apart in front of him. When he answered, I said, "I need legal advice, and I need you to listen before you react." He did. I told him about the email, the missing $550,000, the Paris move, the old backup email, the suspicious questions, and the fact that my mother and sister had left the country. For almost 10 seconds, he said nothing. Then he asked, "Jessica, did the money belong solely to you?" I said yes. "Was anyone else authorized?" "No." "Did you ever sign power of attorney documents for your mother?" "No." His voice changed after that, not louder, but sharper. "Then this is not family drama. This is theft, identity fraud, and potentially wire fraud. Do not call them. Do not threaten them. Do not post anything. Preserve everything." That sentence saved me, because the truth was, part of me wanted to scream. Part of me wanted to send one message asking how my own mother could do this. But Daniel was right. People like Patricia and Madison didn't confess because you appealed to their conscience. They confessed when the walls moved in. That night, I went home and opened the small fireproof box under my bed, where I kept my grandmother's letters. I found the one she wrote 2 months before she died. "Jessica," it said, "your kindness is beautiful, but do not confuse love with access. Not everyone who shares your blood deserves a key." I read that sentence over and over until the tears finally came, But they were not helpless tears. They were angry, clarifying tears. My grandmother had seen what I refused to name. The next morning, Daniel connected me with a forensic banking specialist named Mara Ellis and an investigator named Nora Whitman, a former fraud analyst who had helped recover stolen assets from overseas accounts. Nora's first question was simple. Who benefits if you feel too ashamed to fight? I knew the answer immediately. My mother, Madison. Every relative who would tell me to keep it quiet because family problems shouldn't become legal problems. By noon, we had filed initial fraud reports, frozen what remained of related accounts, contacted the bank's internal investigations unit, and started tracing the transfer chain. By evening, my mother sent another email from Paris. Don't embarrass yourself. No one will believe you. You always were dramatic. I smiled for the first time since the money vanished. She had no idea I had already archived the full header, server path, IP location, and metadata. She thought she was insulting her daughter. She was actually handing evidence to a woman who built cases for a living. The investigation moved faster than my grief. That was a blessing. Grief asks questions that have no answers, but evidence gives you something to hold. Mara found that the transfers had been initiated after a password reset, and the reset had been approved through that old backup email. From there, Nora discovered that the backup account had been accessed repeatedly from my mother's home internet during the weeks before she left. Not once, not accidentally. 11 times. There were searches in the browser history recovered from a synced device. Can family member access trust money? Wire transfer limit without alert. Paris long stay apartment deposit. And the one that made Nora go silent for a moment. Adult child stole from mother defense. My mother had been preparing not only to steal from me, but to accuse me if she got caught. Madison had left her own trail too, because Madison had never understood consequences. She only understood performance. Her social media was full of hints, a photo of a passport beside a glass of champagne, a caption that read, "Some girls are finally getting the life they deserve." A comment from one of her friends asking, "How did you afford this?" Madison replied, "Family redistribution, LOL." Nora printed that one and placed it in the evidence folder without saying a word. The deeper we went, the more the story changed. This was not a spontaneous escape. My mother had sold furniture, closed her local accounts, forwarded mail to a private mailbox, and told neighbors she was retiring abroad. Madison had ordered designer luggage with my debit card 2 days before the transfer cleared. They had even contacted a Paris relocation agent and described themselves as financially independent women seeking a fresh start. Financially independent. With my grandmother's money. Daniel advised patience, but patience felt like swallowing glass. Every discovery brought a memory with it. My mother telling me I was selfish for refusing Madison's rent. Madison crying because I wouldn't pay for her certification course. My relatives praising me for being the stable one, while quietly expecting me to absorb everyone else's chaos. The family system had always been a machine, and I had been its battery. Now, for the first time, I had unplugged myself. That was when Patricia finally called. I let it ring. Then Madison called. I let that ring too. Then came a voicemail from my mother, her voice bright and fake, like she was trying to sound concerned for an audience. "Jessica, sweetheart, I think there's been a misunderstanding. You need to call me before you do something that hurts this family." I saved it. 10 minutes later, Madison left one too. "You're seriously trying to ruin our lives over money Grandma gave you by mistake? That money should have been Mom's anyway." I saved that as well. Daniel listened to both and leaned back in his chair. "They're not denying access. They're just justifying it. That helps us." But the real breakthrough came 3 days later, when Mara traced one of the intermediary accounts to a shell business created only 4 months earlier. The registered contact was not my mother. It was Madison. The business name was Harper Creative Imports, a company with no inventory, no website, and no business purpose except receiving stolen money. Madison had signed the formation documents using her full legal name, Madison Claire Harper, and listed my mother as managing advisor. When Daniel showed me the paperwork, I laughed once, not because it was funny, but because it was so careless it felt unreal. They had built a fraud case against themselves and decorated it with their signatures. Still, Daniel warned me that getting money back from overseas could take time, and criminal consequences would depend on cooperation between agencies and banks. So what do we do now? I asked. He slid a folder across the table. Inside were copies of the email, the voicemails, the transfer chain, the shell company documents, login records, and a draft civil complaint. Now, he said, we give them a chance to explain themselves under conditions they don't control. My mother had spent years making me answer for things I didn't do. Now it was her turn to answer for what she did. Daniel arranged the call as a recorded legal conference, not a family conversation. That distinction mattered. My mother joined from Paris wearing pearls and a cream blouse, sitting in front of tall windows like she wanted the background to prove she had won. Madison appeared beside her in oversized sunglasses, indoors, because apparently crime still needed branding. Daniel introduced himself formally. Nora stayed off camera. Mara listened in. I sat very still. My mother opened with a sigh. Jessica, I'm disappointed it came to this. That was the first trick. Make my reaction the problem, not her theft. I said nothing. Daniel said, Mrs. Harper, this call concerns unauthorized access to accounts owned solely by Jessica Harper and the transfer of $550,000 through accounts connected to you and Madison Harper. Madison scoffed. Unauthorized? She's acting like we robbed a bank. It was family money. Daniel looked down at his notes. So you acknowledge the transfers occurred? My mother's face tightened. Madison glanced at her. That small look was worth more than any confession. We acknowledge, my mother said carefully, that certain funds were moved for safekeeping because Jessica has been unstable and financially controlling. There it was. The defense she had searched for. Unstable, controlling, dramatic. Words she had used all my life, now dressed up as legal strategy. Daniel asked, Did Jessica authorize you in writing to access or move the funds? My mother's lips pressed together. She would have if she understood what was best. I almost laughed. Daniel did not. That is not authorization. Madison leaned forward. Grandma wanted Mom to have a good life. Jessica manipulated her. Everyone knows that. For the first time, I spoke. Name one person who knows that because Grandma told them. Madison opened her mouth, then closed it. My mother said, Don't take that tone with your sister. Something in me snapped, but not loudly. Quietly, permanently. You stole $500,000 from me and moved to Paris, I said. You don't get to correct my tone. The silence after that was beautiful. Daniel then began reading items from the evidence list, the backup email access, the login records from my mother's home, the shell company, Madison's formation documents, the relocation payments, the voicemails, the social media comment about family redistribution. With each item, my mother's Paris face cracked. Madison took off her sunglasses. Wait, she said. What shell company? My mother shot her a look. Daniel paused. Ms. Harper, are you saying you were unaware Harper Creative Imports was used to receive part of the transferred funds? Madison turned toward my mother. Mom, you said that was just for the lease. My mother whispered, Be quiet. That was the moment I understood the fracture. They had betrayed me together, but not equally. My mother had used Madison's greed as a vehicle, and Madison had signed whatever made her feel rich. Daniel ended the call by giving them 48 hours to agree to a repayment structure, cooperate with asset recovery, and preserve all communications. My mother tried one last performance. "Jessica, if you do this, you'll destroy your family." I looked at her on that screen, sitting in an apartment paid for with my stolen future, and I felt nothing but clarity. "No," I said, "you destroyed it. I'm just submitting the paperwork." The call ended. For 2 minutes, no one in Daniel's office spoke. Then Nora turned her laptop around. During the call, Madison had apparently panicked and deleted several Paris posts from her social media. Nora had already captured them. "Amateurs always delete too late," she said. That night, my mother sent a text. "Please don't let lawyers poison you against us." Madison sent one a minute later. "Mom said some of those accounts weren't even yours. Whose accounts were those?" "Jessica, answer me." I stared at that question and laughed. Not because she was right, but because she had finally realized something important. They had not simply stolen from a daughter they underestimated. They had stolen from an account tied to a documented inheritance, monitored by a law firm, protected by banking agreements, and linked to fraud triggers they never understood. They thought I was a lonely woman with savings. They had walked into a room full of alarms and called it freedom. The 48 hours passed with no repayment agreement. Instead, my mother tried shame. She called relatives and said I was suing my own mother for wanting dignity in old age. Madison told cousins I had always been jealous of her and was punishing them for moving abroad. For one awful day, my phone filled with messages from people who had never asked how I was when the money disappeared. "Can't you settle this privately? Your mom raised you. Madison is young. Money comes and goes, but family is forever." I replied to none of them. Daniel filed the civil complaint. The bank escalated the fraud investigation. The shell accounts were frozen. The Paris rental company, alerted that funds used for the lease were disputed, suspended their long-term agreement pending review. That was the first real consequence. Madison called me at 3:12 a.m. Portland time, which meant morning in Paris. I didn't answer. Her voicemail was different from before. No attitude, no performance. Just panic. "Jess, the apartment manager is saying the payment is under investigation. Mom is freaking out. They locked the tenant portal. What did you do?" The answer was simple. I told the truth to people who could act on it. 2 days later, my mother called Daniel's office instead of me. She offered to return $80,000 if I signed a mutual non-disparagement agreement and withdrew all claims. Daniel refused before I even had to respond. Then she offered $120,000 and a written apology for any confusion. Refused. Then Madison emailed me directly. "I didn't know Mom was using your actual inheritance. She said Grandma cheated us." I read that sentence 3 times. It was not an apology. It was Madison stepping away from the fire once she felt heat. Nora advised me not to respond, but she added it to the file. The pressure worked like sunlight on rot. More details surfaced. Madison had used part of the money for designer purchases and private tours. My mother had prepaid 6 months of rent, hired an immigration consultant, and transferred funds to a French brokerage account under the claim of retirement planning. The bank recovered part of the funds quickly because the receiving institutions froze suspicious balances after documentation was provided. Another portion was held pending legal review, but some had already been spent, and that was where consequences became personal. To satisfy the emergency court order, my mother had to disclose assets. She still owned the townhouse in Portland through a trust arrangement. She had hidden it from me while pretending she had left everything behind. Daniel moved to place a lien on it. When she found out, she finally called me from an unfamiliar number, and this time I answered with Daniel beside me. "Jessica, she cried, and for 1 second I heard the mother I used to want. Please, they're saying I may lose the house. I said, You mean the house you emptied before stealing from me? She sobbed harder. We're family, please. There it was. The word people use when fairness no longer benefits them. Family. I asked her one question. When you wrote Enjoy Being Broke, were we family then? She didn't answer. Madison grabbed the phone next, voice trembling. I can't get in trouble for this. Mom told me it was basically ours. I said, You signed the company documents, Madison. I didn't read them, she cried. You read Paris apartment listings? I said. You read designer receipts. You read champagne menus. You read everything that made you feel rich. You just didn't read the consequences. Then I ended the call. That night, Madison posted a vague story about being betrayed by someone you trusted. Within an hour, someone commented, Is this about the stolen inheritance? She deleted the post. Too late. People were beginning to understand. My mother's friends from Portland stopped defending her. Madison's influencer acquaintances unfollowed her. The relocation agent terminated their contract. The Paris apartment gave them notice. Their beautiful escape was shrinking into hotel rooms, legal notices, frozen cards, and international calls they could not control. And the strangest part was, I did not feel victorious yet. I felt awake. For years, I thought revenge meant making people hurt. But real revenge, I learned, is making the truth impossible to escape. The final hearing did not look like a movie. No one shouted. No one fainted. There was no dramatic confession under a spotlight. There was only a clean courtroom, a judge with tired eyes, stacks of documents, and my mother looking smaller than I had ever seen her. Madison sat beside her, pale and stiff, no sunglasses, no smirk, no Paris glow. Daniel presented the evidence methodically. Ownership records, inheritance documents, login histories, transfer chains, shell company filings, international payment receipts, voicemails, emails, deleted posts, and the conference call transcript. My mother's attorney tried to argue emotional misunderstanding. He suggested Patricia believed she had a moral claim because my grandmother had created division by leaving the funds to me. The judge asked one question. Did Jessica Harper authorize the transfers? The attorney paused. Not expressly. The judge said, Then we are not discussing a family disagreement. We are discussing unauthorized financial access. Madison's attorney tried to distance her from my mother, claiming she was manipulated. Daniel responded with the company documents bearing Madison's signature, the luxury purchases, and the message where she called the money family redistribution. Madison began crying then, but quietly, like she had finally realized tears could not purchase innocence. The ruling ordered restitution of recovered funds, repayment of the remaining balance, legal fees, and damages. The lien on my mother's townhouse remained in place until the debt was satisfied. The shell company was dissolved. The bank continued its own fraud process. And while I cannot describe every legal consequence as instant or simple, I can tell you this. By the time it was over, my mother and Madison did not have Paris, did not have my money, and did not have the story they had tried to sell. The townhouse was eventually sold under pressure of the judgment. My recovered funds went into a new protected account with stronger controls, and a portion of the damages helped me start the business I had once been too afraid to build, a digital records and fraud prevention consultancy for small law firms and elder estate cases. I named it Eleanor Archive Group, after the woman who warned me that love should never require handing someone a key to your life. My mother sent letters for months. The first ones were angry. You humiliated me. You chose money over your mother. You let strangers judge your family. The later ones became softer. I miss you. I made mistakes. I don't know how to live with Madison blaming me. Madison sent one email after returning from Europe alone. Mom ruined both our lives. I know I shouldn't have listened. I almost replied. Almost. Then I remembered every time they had watched me struggle and called it strength because it was convenient for them. I remembered the email. Enjoy being broke. I remembered my mother asking for mercy only after the world asked her for accountability, so I did not reply. Instead, I printed the email, placed it in a folder with the court order, and locked it away. Not because I wanted to live in bitterness, but because memory is a boundary too. A year later, I bought a small office overlooking the harbor. On the first morning, I stood there with coffee in my hand and watched the boats move through the gray-blue water. My life was quieter than before. No emergency calls from Madison, no guilt texts from my mother, no family dinners where I had to prove I deserved respect while paying for everyone else's comfort. Some people think cutting off family is an act of hate. It isn't always. Sometimes it is the first honest act of love you give yourself. I did not get revenge by becoming cruel. I got revenge by becoming unavailable to people who only loved me when I was useful. If you are listening to this and you are the responsible one, the strong one, the one everyone calls selfish the moment you say no, please hear me clearly. Being needed is not the same as being loved. Blood can explain a connection, but it does not excuse betrayal. My mother and sister moved to Paris with my stolen future and thought I would collapse. Instead, they called in panic, asking, "Whose accounts were those?" They were mine, my money, my proof, my grandmother's last protection, my life. And for the first time, I kept all of it. So tell me honestly, if your own family stole everything you built, would you forgive them, fight them, or disappear from their lives forever?
Our team is always working to create better stories that feel emotional, realistic, and useful for viewers who enjoy revenge and family drama content. Please remember that the story is completely fictional and made only to entertain and educate. We hope each video brings a thoughtful lesson about courage, independence, and knowing when to let go.